access to the recording through your email within 48 hours of class ending. If you have any questions, comments, or technical issues, you can feel free to post everything right into your group chat. I will ask that you please refrain from entering any personal information in the chat, since that will be on the recording. And for those who are subject to regulated status, the chat feature should not be used. The audience may include customers, vendors, or competitors of you or your employer. So if you do choose to take advantage of the interactive features available in this training, please keep in mind that you're responsible for any information you choose to share. And finally, at the end of class, you'll see a short course evaluation on your screen. Your feedback is important to us, so if you can take a brief moment to fill out the survey, it's very much appreciated. All right, at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Sebastian to get started.
All right, thank you very much for that introduction, and also a warm welcome from my side, and hi to this class about how to, well, improve coding time with applying automation, and in general, how to become a more efficient software developer. So my name is Sebastian, originally from Munich, Germany, and that's also something I like to do in my classes. So just ask you from where you're watching, so you can warm up and type something into the chat if you like, of course. So I'm recording this or sending this from Vienna, Austria. So hi from Europe from this point. And yes, about myself. So I do a lot of stuff that is related to Java, as you can see here on the screen, but also software development in general, and especially how to become a more productive developer. That is a topic that is really interesting to me, so that I want to share. And I want to get started with the topic of automation, which is a very important topic and arguably one of the most important things when it comes to using a computer, because it's basically using with a human. But it's not just automate basically all of the steps where it would make sense to be automated. And yeah, that's what we would like to start out with. And I will show you how this also comes in these smaller forms. So automation, as I will call it, is basically using the computer in the correct way. And that's also interesting to think about, especially in these times where we hear a lot about AI systems being developed and, you know, computers arguably getting smarter. Where I would say, actually, it's not about specifically that computers are that smart. It's actually, we can use computers for a lot of things and a lot of tasks where it really makes sense to use automation. And other tasks are better done by us humans. For example, where it involves really deep thinking, the sort of analysis that we do as humans, or creative type of thinking. And with this, very often, automation can be used to sort of increase their communication bandwidth. So getting the point across. What do I mean by that? Well, if you say, well, I have this, you know, big coding project and I have this name of a class, for example, if you use object-oriented programming, and I want to change just that name into something that transports the meaning better. Well, that is a good idea to do, right? And you might think the chat. I will do the same thing as well. Okay, somebody wrote ChatGPT. That's already interesting. That's definitely an interesting tool these days. So for me, shortcuts for that, or actually some automation features. Now, if you think about it, a feature like that, for example, new and then Java class, is already automation, because you're using this part of automating rather than writing all of that stuff yourself, even if it's just a tiny bit of code. But over time, that can help you a lot. Not only with regards to the time, because you might say, well, this saves you a few seconds, but also with regards to the mental energy that you spend. So it's just smoother. You know, you're in this flow experience. You don't have to think, oh, what was the syntax again? Or which keyword comes first or something like that. You just write it to the time. And then Java class is already automation, because you're using this part of automate. I used some, well, shortcuts for that, or actually some automation features. Now, if you think have in the rest of my code base, right? And then I would need to search and replace, or ask the compiler if it still compiles, and all these things. So you know about that. Of course, I would like to use an IDE refactoring feature. Now, this is a refactoring feature that really makes sense to sort of know by heart. Why? Because we rename stuff all the time. There are certain features that really make sense. So, for example, you could go and right-click Refactor Rename. That's the menu that you have here in IntelliJ. In other IDEs, there will be a different menu. But I really challenge you, and we'll talk about the topic of using your keyboard, some shortcuts, much more in detail in a second. But I really challenge you that while you do the regular coding work, that you are not touching your mouse. You basically try to stay on the keyboard and say, okay, is there a keyboard shortcut for this particular action? And I bet you there is. So in IntelliJ here in that setup, that's, for example, Shift F6 in order to rename a class or an identifier in general. And then I can change something here. I change this back to hello, I press enter, and then the change is being performed. This is especially interesting if I say I have some variable. Let's introduce some variable. And then I have something like size length. This doesn't really make sense, but just to invoke some methods. And I would like to print this twice. Now, if I'm going to rename that variable, you will see, of course, that it changes the variable in all the parts, which makes much more sense than changing it myself here. The same is true for anything that I have. If I would like to extract a method and rename that method, so for example, I call this say hello. Let's replace this as well. I go here and say, okay, please rename this as well. And it renames all the invocations, which is much safer than to just change these strings myself and, well, break the code. And then I see if I have a statically compiled language with the compiler that it doesn't compile anymore, and then I can fix it. But of course, I should use the IDE features. All of these things are examples for automation. Now, if you have a look at the documentation of your IDE, you will see hundreds and thousands of actions, literally, that you can do in your IDE. And especially in IDE like IntelliJ is very powerful and very sophisticated. You can do tons of things, from code generation to refactoring features to all of your hierarchy in your code. And then you might ask, okay, that's interesting, but which one should I now learn by heart? So for example, I just showed two: renaming an identifier and introducing a variable that I have here. So I introduced the hello as a variable. If you remember, for example, if I say hello, I can undo this by inlining it. And now I introduce a variable again. In IntelliJ, in my setup here, that's Control Alt V. And then I have that. Now, if you ask, okay, which one should I learn by heart? Which of these features? Now, the answer for that is don't learn the ones that I know or that I show you here, but learn the ones that you use all the time. And all the time means, multiple times per week or even multiple times per day. So what I mentioned before, while you're having a regular coding session, you shouldn't need to touch your mouse and, right-click menu or whatever, or search for a specific action. There's a nice tip in IntelliJ, like hit Shift twice and you can search for anything, for example, rename, and then you will see some rename action after a while, and then I could go to the rename action and do it. But of course, it's much faster to say, well, what is the shortcut for it? So for these actions that you use all the time, trying to learn them. There are some more tips about that, some plugins that help you pointing out certain shortcuts that you should press. But again, the point is to use automation where otherwise you would do manual steps. And now if we talk about keyboard concepts, I like this term because an application that is well thought out in this regard really has a concept how it is supposed to be used. And you notice that when you use this IDE, for example, is to say I did the extract variable where the shortcut was V, including Control Alt V. Or if I say I would like to extract a parameter, Control Alt P, or I extract a constant, Control Alt C, right? So you get the mnemonic patterns here. There's really a recurring pattern where it makes it easy to remember, where it says, okay, it follows some logic there. Really, somebody put some thought into it, which is very nice if our applications do that. And then it's easier to get along and, of course, learn this. So that's that. And with this regard, well, we can identify and learn here a lot. And that's already an interesting question where we can put a discussion. So I already told you my thoughts about this, where the balance is between knowing all of the IDE shortcuts and manually using menus. So basically is to say, okay, in an ideal world, we would know all of the IDE shortcuts by heart, but I can tell you, I know some of the creators of these IDEs, and they say even them, they don't remember all of them. Of course not. I mean, who would? Or manually using the menus. Well, my point is, for the ones that you use all the time, you might want to spend some effort to just learning them, even sometimes learning them by heart if it's something really common, like renaming identifier or extracting method, extracting variable, something that we use all the time, where you learn the shortcut. But then something sort of sophisticated, like, I don't know, replacing inheritance with delegation or something like that. There is a feature like this in IntelliJ where you might want to use the menu or search for it, because probably you don't remember that shortcut if you use it once a year, or very seldomly. So that's that. I think this is a sort of a balance where it might make sense here. Okay, let me have a quick look at the chat again. You had some more programs: Notepad++, Firefox, IntelliJ. Okay, Studio SQL, yes, for databases. That's interesting. Notepad, Jupyter Notebook. Does PowerShell count? I would say yes, the shell counts as well. Key Promoter acts as a nice plugin. Yes, that's one there. And in this regard, we can be quite productive. That's definitely true. All right, so that's that about the IDE shortcuts and using the keyboard here with the keyboard shortcuts. But of course, there is more with the IDE that is really, really helpful. So shortcuts is one thing. Probably the most known IDE feature is this context-aware suggestions, these IntelliSense or whatever you call this. Basically, in an object-oriented language, you write the identifier and the dot, and then you see a selection, a choice, what you have there. Of course, that's also automation, because then we don't have to consult the documentation or learn them by heart, which is something that you probably use all the time. But there's some more interesting things there. So for example, code generation, that's really helpful if we say we use all the time. But also ask yourself, if we say, okay, if I would like to add inject something here, then typically what you do, you type this, that's called an annotation in Java, and then you select the correct import, you press enter, and then you say, okay, I would like to inject a class here, like dependency injection. Okay, but this code snippet comes all over again in my code. I type this all the time when I'm writing Java Enterprise code. So even for that, it makes sense to have a shortcut. So that is a live template that doesn't do much. It just prints this text, but also does the import. So I don't have to spend the mental energy to see, okay, which correct import it was, and I can simply go there. Or say I would like to have some application scoped bean for this particular class that I can use. Or I would like to have something like a post-construct method or a pre-destroy method, things like that, just to create them very, very quickly. So that just makes sense. Why? Because I don't have to spend the mental energy, and it's slightly faster, and I type these things really all the time. That is true, for example, for frameworks and libraries you use very often, but you can also define them, of course, for your own project. So if you say, in my project, I always have to use this particular pattern, it's recurring code snippets, just define your own live templates, and that works really well. There's also a nice notation, at least in IntelliJ, where you can have what is called a suffix live template. So you can not only type them just in the beginning, but also after a certain identifier. And then, for example, I can say hello dot and then system out, which wouldn't be valid Java syntax. But if I replace this and expand it with tab, then it will wrap this in the invocation, which is then just really nice to write or nice to do. So that's kind of cool. And then we can have this, for example. Okay, so this works. This also works with an identifier. If I say I have a variable that is called hello, and then I say hello dot sysout, then it is just nicely wrapped, which is another feature. And again, for these suggestions and live templates, don't stop with the ones that come with your IDE, but define your own ones that then you can use and go with. Which for that, now I have an exercise for you. Find 3 potential boilerplate candidates for defining live templates, or however they are called in your IDE, in recent code files or recent projects. When you say, okay, you can look through the code, you can try to remember, what am I typing all the time? Are there certain recurring patterns? Are there certain boilerplate things that I need to or should automate? And identify them, at least 3 of them, and then also write a live template for that, or a snippet. So you can have a look in documentation of your IDE, how that works, and then just use the live template in the future instead of typing these things manually all over again. So that's really, really helpful, and that makes you just a little bit faster. Okay, so now you can do this as an exercise. And in general, now let's move on just with the topic that is also a little bit interesting to think about in a more general term, and that is connected to basically they are in a certain position. You know, the home row is this particular middle lane where there's F and J, and they should be located for your index. That's what I do here. All of the major IDEs have a then you get different keys, and they are actually segments. So especially, okay, when to use the key. And then I would like to automate, if I code some enterprise software, how to build and how to deploy and run my setup or run my application locally. So this would be a